Okay, good evening, everyone. It is Tuesday, February 20th, 2024. We are here for our Learning and Teaching Committee meeting. It is 5:32 p.m., so I'll officially call this meeting to order. I believe we do have a citizen's comment. Mrs. McCabe, if you wouldn't mind reading the statement, please.
During the public comment period, members of the public body who wish to speak are asked to first state their name and the community in which they reside. Each individual will have up to 3 minutes to address the board on the topic of their choosing. We ask all individuals who address the board to do so with respect and civility toward others. Please note that personnel matters are sensitive and confidential. We also want to inform our speakers that all regular, special, and committee meetings are live streamed and available for viewing at any time on the district's YouTube channel. Personal information should be considered before making a statement that will be recorded and made public. While the board will not respond to today's public comment during this meeting, we are committed to listening to you to help support our work for the district and on behalf of our students, staff, families, and community members. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. McCabe. And we have a comment from Victoria Contreras.
I'm going to read from this because I'm nervous. Is this working? Can you hear me? Okay. Good evening. My name is Victoria, and I live in St. Charles. I am concerned about parent, grandparent, and citizen. I would like to address the topic of parental rights and parental notification in District 303. As a legal guardian of a child in the area, I would ask each school board member to go on record as where they stand on opt-out forms which parents can file with the district on behalf of their children, and on parental notifications, but I do have a few questions. Is the district allowing opt-out forms for the next school year, seeing that I have a child that will be going into junior high? And how do parents go about filling out the opt-out forms? Is this a form that's available through the district, or do I have to find one online? Will this completed form be provided to all the people that have contact with my student during the school day, and any after-school programs that are sponsored by the district and school? Will I be notified in advance of activities being presented at the school that contain information I do not want my student to be exposed to? Examples of presentations I would expect prior notice of and use of opt-out forms would include gender ideology or sex education discussions, instructions, materials, or questionnaires. Marxist ideology, critical race theory, as some districts like to call it, diversity, equity, and inclusion. Additionally, I would like to ask that advance notice on questionnaires and surveys be provided to parents and the option to opt out. Some public schools, hopefully not in this district, are socially transitioning students at schools without telling their parents, maintaining secret files about gender-confused students, and forcing school employees to address students in a way that is inconsistent with their sex. Practices like these not only violate the rights of teachers, and it forces them to lie to parents. They also harm students and clearly ignore the fundamental rights of the parents. Regarding parental notification, parents have a right to be contacted whenever there is a change in my student's gender preference, pronouns, name, and faculty use of bathrooms, changes in service or monitoring related to mental, emotional, or physical health. Healthcare services offered and options to withhold services, i.e. like counseling. Meeting between my student and school staff to discuss gender ideology. Another question I have for our school board is the issue of students identifying as animals. I understand that there are 2 students in Thompson Middle School who identify as cats. They wear cat ears and tails daily. And who knows what other buildings are experiencing this? How is this being addressed with the student body? What are they being told about this behavior and how to handle it? And do these parents know about their children's behavior? This is critical information for us to have. The school district is not a co-parent with mothers and fathers. Every parent has the right and the duty to choose what is best for their children, especially when it comes to the health and decisions that could affect the rest of their lives. I hope this board will defend parents' rights to make decisions for their children regarding the topics that I have listed, against attempts by any school district to usurp that role. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Victoria. Okay, with that, that moves us on to item 2 for discussion. I believe we're going to go right into PLCs in action. So last time we had some discussion regarding specific PLC work, and the board seemed to be interested in hearing more about that. So I believe Dr. Igo has another update for us. And
I do. So our goal really is to be able to provide something like this at the beginning of every learning and teaching, give you kind of just a little insight into what is the work that is happening in our PLCs and how is that transforming the work that we're doing in learning for kids. Just kind of want to ground some of the work that we're doing in this. We have got what we call our PLC learning cycle. And what the PLC learning cycle does really is it tells our PLCs what is it that they need to be doing and when they need to be doing it. So what actions and steps should they be taking prior to the unit? How should they be responding during the unit? And then what are they doing after the unit to make sure students are on track? As we are building this culture in our district, we are really focusing in on creating a PLC culture. And when we talk about that, we're really talking about we are creating a culture where our behaviors and actions are based on evidence-based practices. We're really grounding ourselves in what does evidence say. That as educators, we are consistently enhancing and refining our practices. We understand that continuous improvement is a big part of what we do, and that we are constantly thinking about what was the impact of my instruction and how can I get better? And ultimately that we start to take collective responsibility for our students, that we are all responsible for students and their learning, and how are we ensuring that we're doing those things. So we're really working towards building that culture kind of across the way. So I had the opportunity to kind of go in and meet with a PLC, so I'm gonna have some footage here that I'd like to share with you in regards to kind of our, it's a second grade PLC over at Coron. They were kind enough to let me come in and talk. And then the first question that I kind of posed to them was really how has this process kind of transformed the work that you're doing? So that kind of gave you an insight into how they have kind of evolved their practice over time. And you could hear some of the things that I really want to point out was really that idea that they started to understand the importance of that backwards design. And what we're really talking about is the intentionality of how they build their lessons every single day, and that they're not building their lessons necessarily from like, this is what I'm going to do tomorrow because this is what I've planned, but they're stopping to think, where are my students and what do I need to do next? And how do I intentionally think about the next move I want to make? So that's really kind of at the heart of what we really want to see kind of coming through. Let's see if I can't.
Can I ask just a quick question on that? When you're saying that they are starting to see how the process is laying out and thinking backwards, are you saying just that particular grade level? Or are you saying across various PLCs and groups of teachers?
Well, I think we're seeing it across various groups of PLCs and teachers. I will not say we're seeing it in every single place, but we are definitely starting to see teachers are understanding, right? What you heard at the beginning of that clip is how we approached a PLC before we had all this additional training, right? Like, you may have heard Dr. Gordon or I talk about PLC Light. You were hearing that PLC Light at the beginning, and by the middle or in the end of that clip, you were starting to hear about the deep work of that PLC and how they're pulling that work together.
Awesome, thank you. This is so loud. Awesome, thank you. I really appreciate that clarification.
So,
Christine,
I'm sorry.
really quickly, as far as resources, especially on the English side, right? So Mrs. McCabe and I had the opportunity to go and attend a couple of PLC meetings, English and math, and we definitely have more resources for the formative stuff, for the math side. What progress have you guys made on the ELA side?
Absolutely. So I have another clip that I'm going to show you in a little bit.
Perfect.
Actually, I have like.
Then I'll hang on to that.
No, that's
Keep
okay, because
going.
actually, now that I'm saying that out loud, I'm not sure if I got it into, I've got a good 10, 15 minutes, but I can't remember where I clipped it. But we've definitely really started to peel that away, and I'm going to talk a little bit about it in the Student Achievement Report, particularly at the high school. We've made significant gains in that area, and I'll talk a little bit about what that looks like. But what we are really working with and helping, this idea behind the quick checks, is what we're trying to say is, this isn't something we want you to make. We don't want you to write your own quick check. We want you to use the resources that we have, because by ensuring that we're using the resources we have, we're ensuring the rigor of the standards maintained, right? And there's not a chance that it can come down. So what we've really done at, even in second grade, is to say to them, here are some options for formative assessments. And you'll hear them talk a little bit about, too, them saying, now I understand that I don't do all of these questions. I can pick these 2 or 3, because this is what's important for where my kids are today, for me to know what I do next.
I think
Yes, ma'am.
it was interesting that the teacher talked about, at first I was overwhelmed and I did not believe in this. And then now when you get the results of that work, it's been my experience, and I'm sure Mr. McNally's as well, when you find the thing that gets kids to learn, you do not want to stop doing that. That's what teachers are all about, is having kids be successful. I think she was pretty courageous
Yeah,
to say
100%.
to say that, knowing it was going to be more public. I don't know if she's in the audience, but I think that is a typical thing for teachers, is you're giving me new curriculum and now you're asking me to change this and my practice, but then it's working and now I know and understand. So I do want to commend her for that.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So before I kind of show the next clip, I want to talk a little bit about our quick check protocol. And so you've heard us talk about this idea that we gather evidence of student learning every 5 days, because what we want to know is, are we on track? Are we on track to meet the goal at the end, right? And the change that we're working towards is really saying, and the purpose of collecting the data is to determine what's the impact of my instruction. Did my instruction work? If it didn't work, what am I going to do differently? So that we're really starting that idea around that culture of, how do I refine my skills over time? And so we really have been talking about this idea of tangible evidence. That evidence that you're collecting every 5 days provides you tangible evidence of what's working in your instruction and what's not working in your instruction, so you can take the next step. So I'm going to show just another clip where I asked the group to talk a little bit about how they are approaching data has changed. Whoops, that got cut off a little bit, my video editing skills. Still working on that. But what you really heard them talk about was that there was a student who came up with a strategy that really worked, and they empowered that child to come in and talk about that and share that. And what that really does for them is it builds within our kids that we are all learners. We are always learning together. And I have something that I can contribute to our learning community, just like a teacher has something that they can contribute. And that's really what we want. We ultimately want kids to own that learning. And this was a really great chance for them to do that. So this really just kind of highlights kind of some big ideas. We'll continue to do this. If I can answer any other questions about that, I'd be happy to. It's really the highlight of my day.
I have a couple questions. Can you walk us through again what the structure is in terms of, is there a PLC leader for each grade at every elementary, or can you talk through
Absolutely.
that whole piece?
Yeah, so every grade level has a PLC leader. So at elementary, kindergarten, there's 6 in every building, right? There's K5, then there's some that run across the district for art, music, PE, and power. So really our end goal was that all teachers were engaged in a collaborative process that was beginning to look at their data.
Okay, and then how is it structured for middle school and high school?
So middle school, it is structured that there is one for every, like, 6th grade math, 7th grade math, 8th grade math, 6th grade ELA, right? All those courses kind of across. And then they go cross river for some of those courses that are singletons, like band, fax,
Yeah.
right? Like they go cross river. At the high school, it's a little bit more complicated just because of the nature of high school and the multiple different courses that are taught. So every core department has 2 PLC leaders, plus their department chair, and usually a coach that's able to help, right? And then our CTE, health and PE, those courses, the non-cores, have a PLC leader, and then they have also the department chair that is helping to work through that, and usually a coach that's able to help. It's probably not as seamless at the high school as it is at the elementary and middle school, because you absolutely have a trained leader in every single PLC. And in some at the high school, they have to do, I'm gonna think about like a psychology class at the high school, right? Like, or a psychology course, right? They might not have a direct PLC leader in there, so they have somebody who's kind of facilitating and checking back in with the social studies PLC leader.
Do we have a PLC leader though for the core?
Yeah, for the core.
And then that begs the question to me, so for like science, for example, is there a biology PLC and then a chemistry or is it just
Yep.
science?
Nope, it is by course.
Okay,
So there's a biology, chemistry, physics, or I'm
Okay.
just naming now,
Yeah.
but yeah.
yeah, okay. And then the coaches you refer to, those are PLC coaches?
They're ISCs, so they're our
ISCs,
instructional
okay.
coaches. So at the high school level, our instructional coaches teach a course.
Yeah.
So then they usually are helping to lead those PLCs.
Okay, and then my second question was, you had mentioned that we're not seeing, the adoption level that we saw in the video, across our district or even our buildings. So I'm interested in your, expertise as far as what are the barriers to us getting consistent
Kind of
across the system?
Yeah, I think so. It's really just about time. And so kind of walk through, we didn't necessarily talk about this, but we talk a lot about this idea of managing complex change, and we talk about it from you have to have all of these things in place to be successful. And when one is missing, you get what's on the end there, right? I'm sure you've seen this, right? Confusion, anxiety. What we find is people are all in different places. And so we really have to be thinking about how are we differentiating our instruction and our support based upon where people are at. But we also have to make sure that we are holding people accountable. There's that like reciprocal accountability that we talk about. And this is really the first time we've done something like this and really have put some boundaries in place. And so I always like to say, like, behavior gets worse before it gets better, right? If I put boundaries in place, the goal is going to be to push on those boundaries, and are they really serious? And a lot of times that's, for us, that's part of this. Are they really serious that we have to engage in this? But we have to get them to a spot where they're starting to see success. Because once they start to see success, then they're going to pick it up. Just like you heard her talk about, like, I was not on board for this, but now I'm a believer, right? So we need to kind of put some of those supports in place. So we need to get we're going to start doing very systematic attendance at PLCs and learning what's happening so that we can then figure out how do we differentiate for those. So if we have somebody that's struggling, how can we help them get through that?
One follow-up
Yeah.
to that. So when are you gonna be concerned if we have pockets still that are not adopting? Is that going into next year's school year? Is that this semester?
Yeah, if we don't have a sense, I would hope that by the end of this school year, people have bought in, right? Like they've all experienced some kind of success and are feeling that they can see how this works and how this benefits them. I didn't show the clip tonight, but when they were talking, one of the things that came out, and I swear I didn't pay anybody, like all I did was start video, ask some good questions, but they started to talk about how this process has made their job easier and how it has lifted the burden because they're working together, they're dividing and conquering, and they don't feel alone anymore, right? So we need to get those stories out so that people can, like I can say that all I want, but when my peers say that, then I'm like, okay, I need to think a little, maybe I need to try this again.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
If I can just follow up, so you mentioned some singleton courses.
Yeah.
How many of those are there and how are they working with, Cross River or other buildings or
Yeah,
whatever?
I don't know how many they are off the top of my head. I could definitely, I have that information. I can bring that back to you. They've got a couple of options. So one of the things we set some 3 big ideas this year. One is that we wanted everybody collaborating. One, we wanted everybody collaborating around something that's meaningful. And so we didn't want singletons not engaging or doing something like in science, but they were teaching chemistry, right? And we didn't want that. So we've given a couple of different options, and they've done them a couple of different ways. Sometimes they've gone cross-river, and they're meeting via like Zoom, right? They'll do their meetings that way. We also opted for like a critical friend. So they're still doing all the work, but then once a week they've created a critical friend, and that critical friend sits down and helps them look at their data and asks them questions and kind of engages in that learning. But we've really let that up to kind of those places that those singletons to find the one that was gonna bring meaning to them.
Okay, the critical friend, is that somebody in their building that maybe
Yep.
works in a different discipline?
Yep, could be in a different discipline, could be within the department, maybe I just don't teach that course this semester. Could be an ISC, could be the department chair.
So like, I guess the ones I'm kind of thinking of are like chorus and band, where there's kind of one person.
Yep, they're working cross-river
And
for the
so,
most part.
is that working well, the Zoom and those kinds of?
I can't answer that question. I'm gonna say I feel like yes, because no one's come to me to say this isn't working and I need a new plan, right? But I can definitely check in on that.
One question I would have with regards to classes that have only one teacher or whatever, what about things like Physics C? Just because I know that that's one class, only one teacher, only one section, only taught at one school. We encourage cross-district with different districts, right? Or maybe you could just talk about how
Yeah,
are we,
I
I want to
think
be
we
sure
would-
we're supporting teachers in those situations. I'm sure there's other courses like that, but ones that we offer that are
Yeah.
only one section, one teacher, one
Yeah.
school.
Yeah, and I'd need to look into that, to be completely honest, to see how they have that set up, because we gave them the same. If someone was cross-river and they wanted to do it cross-river, they felt like there was value in that. That was an option, or they could have asked somebody to be their critical friend and work through the process with them from that lens as well. But I also would say sometimes teachers teach multiple courses. There might not be a PLC for that yet, right? They might say, I teach 3 courses of chemistry, and that probably doesn't make sense. 3 courses of physics, and then Physics C. I'm actually participating in the Physics PLC this year because that's what I'm teaching the most of.
Okay, I get it. So a teacher like that may or may not have just physics PLC. They may have a different,
Correct.
okay, perfect. That's a great answer. Thank you so much.
And so, long range, long term, I'm assuming that as we've learned these skills and that becomes part of the culture, those singletons will have already got the process as well, and that these are big assumptions that will become part of the piece. Usually what happens, though, is we start to, I'm talking 5 years from now, so we start to get a little less, I already know this, or that kind of thing. And so
rotation's always hardest, year 3 and 4.
yeah, so I'm assuming that as we look at the long-range thing and we're looking at resources and all the people who are supporting this, that needs to be part of the conversation. If we're going to maintain and sustain it, then it has to hold to a hot level.
Absolutely. That's yes. I mean, we've kind of weaved this into, this is how we do business. And just like anything, it takes time to build that time and that culture, but it is built into all things that we do, right? It's built into the curriculum, the CAI process, right? How we're adapting new curriculum, that's kind of built into that process. It's built into our professional learning process, right? We do curriculum-based professional learning that's focused on PLCs and, all of those things, but it's all about that through line, right? Everything we do needs to be around those 4 questions, and how we approach it is around the 4 questions of PLCs.
And I think it's also the conversation at board committee meetings, board meetings, where we continue to hold the expectation high in our organization. You've heard this before. High expectations, high support, high accountability. A lot of that accountability sits here too, when we're talking about those pieces. And bring it back to when Janelle Keating was here and what she showed. Again, been doing this for 14 years. But where they're presenting out on grade level, common assessments. So they're starting, the board seeing that information. So those are those pieces that continue to move an organization forward so it doesn't get stagnant. Because if you've been in education a while, you know that, and I think in any organization, you have a nice implementation, things are going well, but over time, that's when it starts to kind of flatline on itself. And I thought what Janelle and what White River do is a great way to continue recognizing the importance of that data, of the PLCs, of that conversation that we heard our educators talking about. And if I remember right in that video, she also had educators presenting some of their data as well. So it's a combination, all the things that Dr. Igo spoke about, but also some of those expectations here at this board, at this table, I should say, as we talk about our expectations for our young people in our continuous learning.
It's actually a nice segue right into my question. Just more of like a procedural question regarding the quick checks. So after these quick checks are done and you kind of have these debriefs with PLC members, are we compiling that data? Is there like a qualitative analysis? And then do we store these digitally? Where does it go from there?
Yeah, so kind of on this slide here, you'll see that's kind of the unit planning guide. So within the unit, there's like that they walk through. So what they do each time is they write down what's the learning target, what's the priority standard. They talk about proficiency. You can see them put their data in, and then they walk through the questions that are on that slide. Really, like, what are the trends that I see in the data? Where are kids doing well with the learning target? Where did they struggle? What misconceptions are students showing us in their work, right? What of my instructional strategies worked? Which ones do I need to adjust? And where is there a gap in the learning? So that is the process. And so the goal is that they're keeping notes on this. And we have in our Schoology, we have a Schoology course that people upload these into. They link their data right in. They link their quick checks right in. So you can see the quick check, you can see the data. But really, that's for them so that they can see what worked and what didn't work. And so next year when we start, one of the first things we're gonna ask them to do in the process is take out your unit planning guide from last year. What worked, what didn't work, where did kids struggle, where did they not struggle, so that we're building the first best instruction up front. Because we learn something every year, but we all forget it, right? And when we write it down, right, that's probably a big learning piece from Janelle is like, write it down, because we all think about these things, but then we forget. And so this is like a systematic process where people are putting those notes in, and they, like, you can see one of the last questions is, do I need to adjust anything on this quick check if I want to use it again? And do I need to adjust any of my future quick checks based upon the kids I have in front of me today?
Well, that was my follow-up question for how do we use it then year over year, so thank you. Other questions?
Alrighty.
Are we ready to move on from there? Okay. All right. Are we going to go into Eureka next, or?
I think we are going to go into Eureka. I don't have a presentation for you on that.
No problem.
You have a board memo.
Yep.
But we are moving towards our math resource, Eureka, is kind of moving into a new publication. And as we get ready to move into that new publication, we are interested in purchasing the teacher guides for that. We would typically have brought this a little bit later, usually April. But we have a course that we are planning to teach, and we want teachers, so that teachers are ready and prepared. So we're having teachers, we'd like your permission to put this on the next board agenda so that we are able to order these and that teachers have them in their hands when we do the professional learning, so that they're utilizing the actual resource throughout the learning.
Questions from the board? Dr. Igo, can you expand a little bit? We talked in our planning meeting that this is a resource that we've utilized previously within the district, and we
Yep.
kind of piloted it. Can you expand on that a little bit for the board?
Yeah, I certainly can. So we've been using Eureka for quite a number of years. And they went into a new publication. It's called Eureka Squared. And we have piloted that in 4 of our schools. So one of the things that we're really trying hard to do is when we have something new, that we're putting it out in a few places, getting some of those kinks out, and then we can roll it out all the way through. So that's something that we did with Eureka Squared. When something doesn't work then, it's easy to fix it across 3 or 4 schools. It's very difficult when it's all of 2nd grade needs something and something hasn't worked. This one has quite a few tech pieces that we need to make sure we're up and running. So we've been using it for a couple years now, and we feel really good about the resource, where the kinks are, and specifically what is the types of professional learning our teachers need to successfully implement.
I'm curious how many new curricular resources we will have next year.
So you mean at elementary?
At elementary, yes.
Yeah, we're actually really careful about that. And we have a big, long, list, and we make sure that we're rotating frequently. So one of the reasons that we didn't roll this out as quickly as why some schools did 2 years before we moved in, was we knew we needed to get ELA in place. So we've got ELA. This is a change, but it's not a significant change, right? There's a little bit of knowledge here. We know this. Some of the instructional routines are going to be the same, but there is still some learning. So next year we'll move into math. So they'll be in year 2 of ELA. They'll roll out this math, and then we're gonna roll out, so we've kind of made sure that the elementary teacher doesn't have any more than one new resource at a time.
Thank you.
And can we just cover briefly the cost of implementation, please?
Yep, so the cost is about $50,500 in order for us to purchase those. Thank you.
Yeah, and is that an annual subscription?
It is not, it's a one-time subscription.
One-time subscription, okay.
And
And
then- Oh, and that's for all, or is it for the pilot?
No, this is for everybody.
For everybody? Okay.
How long does that subscription last?
It's a one-time cost, so, until they change the publication date and they aren't going, until they no longer are making this.
So in other words, we'll have access to all online materials until they come out with a new edition?
So the teacher's edition, yep.
I did have one question related to the professional learning.
Yeah.
So, is this an item that will be required for all teachers to do over
It
the
will be.
summer?
We can't necessarily require in the summer, but we will offer it in the summer. We'll offer it in the spring and the summer. And then if they haven't done it, then we'll sub them out in the fall, like we did this year with the reading, so that
Okay.
everybody gets it.
I guess I thought that we did have an opportunity at times to require something even during the summer, but
We do if it's
picked-
under a curriculum and there has to be a vote, but this wasn't really a
Okay.
curriculum we didn't go through the entire curriculum process.
Okay, all right, thank you.
So if it isn't completed during the summer, it'd be done at the beginning of the school year?
Yes.
First couple of days?
Yep,
Okay,
first couple weeks.
couple of weeks, okay. Other questions from the board? I think then that would go to consent agenda at our next board meeting. Okay, seeing no additional questions on that item, that will move us to item 2C, Student Achievement Report. So we did a robust review of the Student Achievement Report in late November, and so this is an update based off of some of the progress over the winter months.
Yeah, so this evening, we're really gonna update specifically as it relates to our district interim benchmarks for the 23-24 school year, as well as those action steps that we put in place for the Student Achievement Report. Specifically, we're really going to be focusing in on our winter iReady scores and what they're telling us, as well as our end of first semester grades and things like that, and what are we doing with that information. As always, we're gonna ground our work in our commitment statement and our core values. And that the strategic priorities really are that roadmap that we use, and the updates we're providing tonight are really gonna cross all 3 of those, all 3 of our priorities. This is a slide that you've seen before, but it really kind of highlights the work that we're doing in learning and teaching as it relates to each of the strategic priorities. To make sure we're moving those forward. And again, this work here is, everything we're gonna talk about tonight is pretty much impacted. You'll see that kind of throughout here, But the thing I want to really stress is that these things they don't work in silos, that they're interdependent. And all of these things really work together in order for us to take and move student learning forward. As we think about that continuous improvement cycle, right, we're really focusing in kind of on the question of, or answering the question is, are we on track to meet our goals? And are we making growth, and is our growth at a rate that will allow us to meet those goals? And if not, what are we doing about that? And this is just a reminder of our theory of action. This kind of outlines how we are systemically implementing the strategic priorities within that strategic plan, right? So we're going to talk about those action steps. They'll be connected back to this. And we're going to be talking about what is it that district administrators are doing, what are building leaders doing, and then what are ultimately PLCs doing to bring about student achievement. So when we talk the presentation, we're going to do a high-level overview of our progress towards those 23 and 24 interim benchmarks. As a reminder, those are evidence-based indicators that are correlated with our college and career readiness. They focus on proficiency in ELA and math at critical points along the K-12 journey, successful transitions between levels, and the successful completion of advanced courses, particularly the opportunity to earn early college credit while in high school. This chart provides an overview of those K-8 indicators. The numbers within the chart represent the 2024 benchmark, and the color represents whether we're likely to meet that benchmark, green, whether we'll be within 5 points of that benchmark, yellow, or we're not likely to meet the benchmark. We're going to be more than 5 percentage points away from our goal. Over the course of the presentation, I'll provide additional information about each of those indicators, but overall, you can see that we are likely to meet 4 of our benchmarks. 3 of our benchmarks we have marked as yellow, and then 2 that we do not feel that we are likely to meet. This chart is the same indicators as they relate to high school. The ELA and math indicators have not been updated, and they are gray on this chart because we do not have a benchmark assessment such as iReady that's designed to be predictive of how students will perform on the SAT. As you can see, we're on track to meet 2 of those indicators. 1 indicator is likely to be within those 5 percentage points, and 2 of those indicators are not likely to be met. We're going to start by talking about the foundations for learning, which includes our sense of belonging as well as attendance. We're going to look at the data in 2 ways. We're going to look at it as it relates to how you've seen it in the student achievement report, as well as the success indicators that we are utilizing in the strategic plan. So the first chart at the top highlights attendance from first semester that correlates with that attendance data that you've seen over time within the student achievement report and in our school report card. You'll see here that chronic absenteeism, that's when a student misses more than 10% of their days, excused or unexcused, continues to still be a concern. However, we are seeing that it's trending downward when we compare it to last year. We see that same downward trend with that chronic truancy, which is when students are missing more than 5% of their school days, but they're unexcused days. And you really see that drop at our elementary level. That second really is a success indicators. That is the percentage of our students that are that have 95% or better attendance. This was an indicator that we had moved from our strategic plan because this one, being in attendance, 95% is correlated with achievement at the college and career ready level. The way to read this chart is that August, September, October, that tells you the percentage of students within that month that hit the 95% mark. And if you go all the way to the end, you see year to date. That tells you if when we take in all of the school days, where are students? I want to remind everyone that this is a really high target, 95%. It means you really can't miss more than 1 day a month, right? So thinking about somebody getting ill, getting sick, there's a chance that that could happen. So as we're looking at this, that we need to have that high indicator. It's where we need to be. But we also need to be thinking about we are trending upward when we compare this data to to last year's data. So before we started, we pulled that data from 2023 to take a look. And we are seeing kind of an upward trend. So we're starting to see more students have 95% be in attendance 95% or more.
Real quick, Christine, before we move on off of this, when I had spent some time with both principals, or East and North, and they had indicated that about 80% of our administrative referrals are due to attendance issues. Have we gotten any, worked with them on that? Because it's a very high percentage of our attendance or our administrative time is being sucked into these
Yep.
referrals, right? So has there been any progress on that front? Because again, it's a huge administrative burden. Like, I'm also getting feedback from other parents and stuff like that. Oh, my kid is, gone, and I got an automated call. I got other things. So can you give us a little feedback on that as well?
And before that, can you clarify, what do you mean by administrative
So,
referrals?
the figure that I got was 80% of administrative referrals, so referrals to admin, are due to attendance. So missing any class.
Like
That's
from the dean, or who's
to the
doing the
dean,
referring?
to the dean, yes. To the dean. From the teachers, it's administrative referrals.
Okay.
Which, again, that when I heard that, that was something that I previously asked and saying, that's a huge burden that's being put on administrators. Then they're chasing down all these attendance things. It's just, the problem's pretty big with continuity of instruction, right? If students are out of the classroom, but then we're just snowballing it by spending a lot of additional resources, following up, tracking it down, doing all the other things with it. So back to my question though, was what's happened with the attendance and what we're doing with it?
Yeah, I think we've really kind of put a big picture view on that. And we've really tried to, one, make that data much more easily accessible and actionable to our teachers so that they know and understand. Like, they can pull their data by class to see how often kids are missing. And we've also done a lot with that proactive communication. So we're working really hard, and I know our principals are working really hard to proactively communicate with our families every month about the importance of attendance, about what that means for them, and making sure that they know those things, as well as working to build that sense of community and making sure that all of our kids feel like they belong, right? We know that will increase their attendance.
Is this something that, because when I got that originally, I went and looked for it, like, how can I see as a parent how many days, right? One of the anecdotal things one of our principals said to me is, she called the parent and said, hey, this is their 10th absence. And the parent was like, really? Like, I had no idea. And so, I asked my wife, where is it in the portal, right? And you have to drill in multiple layers to go and try to find it. And even then, it's only on, it's very difficult to get to. So is there something that we can do from a technology or from a reporting perspective to show it very clearly in the portal? So that, and again, we know we have parents with multiple children, right? So, a couple ways to show it, but so that it's readily available.
I know you could see it in the app
It's-
when you went to your student.
You
At
can.
high school, you can.
Yeah.
You click on attendance.
Yes,
and
well,
it's
high
right
school.
there.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
right there. Yeah.
Let me just do a little bit of digging on that and definitely come back to you about that. But I was under the impression that Mrs. Fairgrave just talked about that it's a fairly easy piece, and it might just be that we need to educate our families on how to find the attendance.
Yeah, that's fine. I think when I walked through it, and maybe there's another way to get to it, but it was at least 3 clicks.
Yeah, it really, once you're into hack, it's really, and again, this is, my reference is high school. You click on attendance and it's right there, and you just scroll month through month.
Yeah, and I'm just thinking it, in kind of our world, right, the business world. I'm not thinking of drilling down into go to see it. I'm thinking if there's a problem, I'm presenting it to parents, or I'm saying, hey, you've already missed a day
Well,
for
that's a
this
different,
month.
that's, to me, that's a
To-
different question. We're talking
Yeah, yeah.
enhancements, but.
Yeah,
Yeah, and I think as we think about our new SIS system, that might be something for us to think about.
At the elementary level, because at the secondary level with hack, it is a fairly quick, easy way to recognize it, but quite honestly, speaking at the elementary level,
Yeah.
that's
I only
an
have
area-
elementary kids, so
Yeah.
that's the
So
only thing
we'll-
that I'm
we'll get a
knowing
little
right
bit
now.
more detail there for you,
Okay.
because you're right, we still want it accessible to our parents, and 3-4 clicks at the elementary is not what I'm used to at the high school level, where it's literally, oh, boy, it's in your face.
I think
An enhancement
middle
is really
school's
what
the
you're-
same.
What you're looking for.
High school, middle school is the same.
Yeah, well, and so I bring that up to the, kind of my second thing here is, are we seeing, with this absenteeism, right? Again, anecdotally, some of the parents that have come to me and said, oh, about this, they have high-performing children that have had a number of absences. And my concern is, like, if we were to kind of try to plot this and say, okay, who's missing, right? If again, my continuity of instruction is off, and I have missed a number of days, like, how are those kids doing? Are those still our high-performing kids? And if so, if they're missing that many days, what is that saying about our instruction?
That was one of the questions I had was, can you miss 5 days out of the month or more and still perform high? If that's the case, then it makes me think about our audit that talked about rigor. Now, I don't want to be, okay, you missed school because you're sick, and therefore now you need to be anxious because you need to get back as fast as possible. But if I'm tired and I just don't want to get out of bed, or it goes back to the belonging thing, do you feel like when you walk into that class, this is where you want to be? So,
Yeah, so
those are the things
we
going
have
through
pulled the
my
data
head.
that way, and absolutely, do we have students that are doing well and aren't coming to school or missing, we would put in that chronic absentee bucket? Yes. However, I would say that's not the vast majority, because we pulled it really by, I can't really describe this chart we have, but we can look at it by performance level, by attendance, by belonging, to see what does that look like. And what we tend to see is that it's pretty consistent, the attendance. We have more kids that are struggling, are less likely to be here, but when at the meets or exceeds, it's about the same, right? We might see 10 to 15% of the kids that are exceeding might have attendance issues, but the vast majority of them do not. Am I making sense?
Yes,
And-
but
and
I
it
think
depends grade by grade and.
Like, I'd
subject
love
by
to see
subject.
yeah,
Yeah, I can totally show it to you. It's a little confusing to show.
When we were working through some of this through strategic plan, correct me if I'm wrong, both of you were there with me, well, and Christine was. We did talk about the research, and I know we had that included when we did our strategic plan. But we did talk about where the connections were with attendance and performance. Of course, belonging also, but, and so to what you were talking about, both of you were talking about with performance and attendance, some children can do great and have a lower attendance, but the data was showing, fill in the blanks here, but the data was pretty substantial with, when we put that into our success indicators based on 95% attendance, and even though that might be a high goal, but it has a pretty strong correlation with performance, right?
Yeah, you
Yes?
said it beautifully. I mean,
Oh.
it's really why we selected that 95, because
Absolutely.
it does correlate with the college career success indicators. To Mrs. McCabe's question, it's a good one, but I think there's also a lot of variables in there, and individual students are going to respond differently in different situations. But I would not disagree with your earlier assessment going back to that August research review that said we have inconsistent rigor applied throughout our district. And I believe that's what we're consistently working towards with grade level standards, working from those. That is the PLC work that is occurring throughout our organization. That is challenging work, but it does lift the bar. When we say third grade's third grade, Algebra 1's Algebra 1, that's what we mean, that it's at grade level standards and beyond, and the instruction is at grade level standards and beyond, and the learning assignments and expectations are at grade levels and standards and beyond. Have we fixed that yet, to an earlier question by Mrs. Feargreave? No, but that is a constant piece we are working on throughout our organizations. Are we seeing less and less inconsistency? We are, but we're not gonna be satisfied until it is across every grade level, across every school, across every course where we have those high levels of expectations, because you can't see that data and say, "Oof, why are they not showing up?" I think there's a lot of variables in there, but one of them is inconsistent rigor applied consistently across our district.
We also do have communication that goes home to parents when, I'm not gonna say this right, but,
Yeah.
because it's changed a little bit, about when their students have had a certain percentage of absences, and keeping the family looped in on that and the importance of attendance.
Absolutely.
And I think that you have to your point, Mrs. McCabe, when we talk about the rigor and individual students and performance, what works for one student is definitely not gonna be the same amount of attendance correlation for grades to another. It just won't be, because every student is different, but I think across the board, it's important for our kids to be in school, of course. But I know that we are doing our best to communicate with parents to keep them in the loop, just so they are aware, because you might have a trip planned and then the student is sick, and then you've got doctor's appointments, and then all of a sudden you realize it's been how many absences in a quarter. So I think we try our best, I think, as a district, to communicate effectively with parents so they do know.
Yeah, ultimately, it's always a partnership with our education, with our students, with our families. It has to be that partnership. It has to work, because on the education front, we can't do it all ourselves, parents and students, but when we work together, we're incredibly powerful together. And when we're missing one of those legs of the stool, it becomes more and more challenging each time. Dr. Igo.
Can I just?
Yeah.
Thank you for,
I'll go back.
I'm looking at October at the high school level. That's a real low number, and it was a low number from where it was in August. It isn't, I'm not asking for the reason why, but if I were a principal, I'd be very curious if some sickness went through, because October is one of those months where we don't tend to have a lot, it tends to be a solid month of school. Yeah.
Yeah, and interestingly enough, we've been watching, right? Like, this is the first time we've really taken the data and used it this way. But you see that same dip last year in the data in October and November. Because I had the same thought, right? Like, what is that? So we have to dig at that a little bit to understand what's happening. There's definitely something up.
Have you, I'm sure you've broken it down by freshmen all the way through, so is there a particular group that's driving that versus another?
I would say as they
For
advance
October?
through high school.
Well, but even if you're looking at October, for example, is there a particular group that holds enough weight that they're driving?
No, I would say,
39.5.
I mean, it's always at the higher end, right? 11 and, at least right now, 11 and 12 seems to be at the higher end. I didn't see anything in the data that would indicate.
Are they all going on college trips in October? That kind of, you know.
Maybe,
Well,
That's a low
because,
number.
for example, in October, when it's the PSAT, right?
Yep.
That's taken, all the seniors, they have that day off, for example.
Right, that wouldn't be counted
And-
against them, though.
And there was, Oh, that's true, so it's not even in this? Okay, okay.
So I have a question regarding high school, and I'm going to guess that the data for partial days, you know, I would imagine that middle school, it's probably higher, and then at high school, I imagine that ramps up dramatically. Do we have data on partial days?
Yeah, we have we have the data by period.
And I'm gonna guess that the early periods are the ones where there's the greatest amount of absence.
Of course,
Um,
yeah.
And so I guess that's, the question I have then is are we tracking that performance data for performance by,
Yep,
by,
Period.
by
By period.
period? But it's, by period, it's not really gonna work because somebody might have English first period and somebody else has biology first period. So that's a little harder data to track, I know, but are we finding a way to do that?
yeah, so we do have it set up so that every teacher can see every class period and who's been absent, right? So that, because it's also easy for a teacher sometimes to lose track that it's been, you know, we're hitting that number, right? So they really, Melinda Roberts really did a nice job of working with Dave and his department to get it by teacher, by class, by period. They can pull it up and see every kid and when they're like teetering off that 95%.
So not just the teachers though, I'm talking about, you know, it's kind of the way you're tracking the data for the district, that would be probably valuable to track for the administrators to track as well. Because I think that you can't teach somebody who's not there.
Dr. Igo, one more follow-up since we were just talking about that. Can you expand on how or when parents are notified and what would prompt that parental notification?
When they're absent, yeah, so anytime a student is not in school, we're required under school code to call and make contact with families. So anytime they're not there, there would be if the parent hadn't called in, we then follow up with a call to the family.
And then, for example,
Within I think I can't remember exactly, I wanna say like within 4 hours.
and then the letters illustrating that students have missed, when would that be prompted?
When does that come? So they, anytime a student hits that 10 or 5% mark, they send a letter out and let families know.
That way folks listening at home can
Yeah,
understand
100%.
why they're receiving that. Thank
Yep.
you.
All right, so looking at sense of belonging, this chart is like we've collected our sense of belonging data. We've typically done that fall, and spring actually, not even winter. But this year, as it relates to our strategic plan, we are gathering that data on a monthly basis so that we can kind of work through that. When we look at where we were last year or where we started, we can see that our students are reporting a constant sense of belonging, right? We're right around the same amount. We have seen it from elementary, from the spring of last year to this year, a pretty large increase from where they've been in the past. So that's nice to see. But you can kind of, again, new data for us as we're starting to unpack it and understand the trends of when it's like we're seeing it increase over time, but we're also seeing there are places where it's dipping. So we're really looking at it and trying to understand it this year so that we're able to respond to it moving forward.
How frequently is the sense of belonging data gathered?
Once a month. We call it pulse data, right? So we would anticipate that sometimes kids are not going to feel like they belong, right? Everybody has a bad day. But we're certainly hoping we want to see over time, right, that we mostly are experiencing that.
And what grade do we start that in elementary?
Third grade.
Okay.
Third grade. So these are the action steps that we highlighted from the student achievement report. You can see that these are action steps that are currently in progress. Really trying to get that committee, working through a committee to identify those root causes, making sure that we have those students who do have chronic absenteeism, we have a plan in place. A lot of our schools do daily check-ins, they do check-in, check-outs with those families, they connect with families for the purpose of understanding what the issue is so that to see if we can find a way to overcome that. We're really doing it and looking at chronic absenteeism from both from a proactive as well as a reactive stance. All right, we're gonna talk a little bit about ELA and kind of our iReady scores. Just as a reminder, iReady Our benchmarks are set on IAR, which is our state assessment that comes once a year. iReady is our benchmark assessment system that we give 3 times a year, that's aligned to the state standard and allows us to make projections about where students are and what is likely to happen. So that's really what this data is able to provide us with. So this slide indicates kind of that fall to winter performance for grades 1 through 5. We don't have kindergarten on this slide because that fall window assessment was within those first couple of weeks of school. And we didn't feel like we wanted to give our kindergartners an opportunity to settle into school before we did an assessment. It was like in the first 2 weeks of school. They took the assessment, it just wasn't in the window, so we're not able to do the fall to winter kind of percentages that you see here. When we look at our proficiency levels, what you'll see is that they are similar to what we've had in previous years. Those 3rd and 5th grade is boxed because those are the grades that we look at on our interim benchmarks. However, I do want to call a little bit of attention to 1st grade. While the proficiency levels look the same, when we really dug into the data and looked at it by domain, we identified phonics as an area of concern. And so that's an area that we didn't feel like our students were growing fast enough to meet the proficiency standards or the priority standards we established. So we've kind of identified that, and as a district, have a district-wide kind of improvement plan in place. And we're working with our reading specialists to make sure that we are being very intentional about how we're supporting our 1st graders and in terms of building those phonics skills. 3rd grade for us, we have seen improvement in proficiency levels year over year on the IAR, but we haven't yet hit our benchmark assessment. So we've really been focusing in on 3rd grade this year, specifically in terms of how do we respond to reading through writing. So you might remember in the Student Achievement Report, we had really big success with doing that work. Particularly, we saw that success at 4th and 5th grade. So we really kind of put some intentional focus at 3rd grade. When we look at the national percentile ranks that we received from this at both 3rd and 5th grade, we start to see that students are definitely improving in that national percentile rank. That shows us that kids are learning and growing more quickly than their peers. It would remain the same if they were making the same amount of growth over time. This again is fall to winter for our middle schools. Again, our proficiency levels look similar as they have previously. And around 8th grade, we definitely see that national percentile rank improving. And what that means is that that students are continuing to grow at a faster rate.
Could I ask a quick clarifying question? Just because it's boxed here, so 8th grade, slide 17, I'm sorry, if you could go back one.
Yep.
This is so loud today. When you're looking at the fall to winter data where it's in the green and it's 32 to 40, can you talk a little bit about, that's above standard, or above, grade level, mid to above. That's not, when we're looking at the lower numbers, that's not where they're, with regards to reading specifically, and you're looking at one grade level below the 19% and 21%. If you're taking that in the reverse to get the 100%, we're not saying that those 21% are not reading. It's not that they're not reading, or is that what that's saying?
No.
Can you just explain that and clarify? That was a horrible way to ask my question. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I think what you're asking, right, is like I'm going to go back. What you're seeing there, right, is we've got those 2 green bars, right? One's dark green. That dark green tells us that our kids are already at the mid or above grade level. That's what they're showing us. And the lighter green is showing that they're working within grade level standards, but at the early onset of those grade level standards. So when we talk about our kids working at grade level, we would add those 2 together because that group is working on grade level standards, right? And you talked a little bit about each of those. But I think a piece that sometimes is important to note is that our state assessment has set the bar very high. So in order for us to reach proficiency, and I'm not in any way suggesting we shouldn't have a high bar, but it is a high bar, you have to score somewhere at the 70 to 75th percentile. So that means, right, just statistically, that shows how much we need to push our kids in order to get there. So while they might not meet on the standard or might not show that they meet on the state assessment, it doesn't mean they aren't working at grade level or they don't have those skills. It's just that they're not hitting them at that high level. Is that what you're asking?
I think so. I'm looking, when I was looking through these numbers, I'm thinking, okay, so does this mean actually that in the fall, in 8th grade, 21% of our children are not able to read? With, specifically when it's on this reading chart.
For sure. That is not what that's saying.
That's not what that
Students
means,
are certainly
correct?
reading. They might be reading below grade level or below standard is probably a better way to say that because this is aligned to the state assessment.
But you're saying it's not that they're not reading or able to read, that the proficiency, I think that was what really clarified that when you're saying the proficiency level is not that it's below average, it's below the state assessment, which is quite high.
Correct.
Which you're probably getting, later on, you're gonna talk about this, I think, because it was in further pages about versus national standards, which I think is the next one. But you were saying that that is much, it makes a better, straighter line, not straight, it makes a better line with the national average versus state proficiency. And it just makes it a little bit more clear, I think. I don't know, I'm kind of,
But can I follow up to that though? So, but if you're looking, that is saying though, for 8th grade, we had in the fall, right, we had 20% that were 3 or more below grade level reading.
3 or more? We had 14% below that were 3 or more.
Right, but the 14 and the 6, so worst case
Oh, I
scenario,
see.
you've got 20%
Those are 2 and 3, yeah.
students that
Are below grade level, yes.
So,
Yeah.
so is the right way to read that then? Take that 20%, the 6% and the 14, the pink and the red in the
Yep.
fall of 8th grade. That 20% is reading at, the 14 is reading at the 5th grade level.
Correct.
The 6% is reading at the 6th grade level.
Correct.
8th grade minus 3, because I see the little key,
Yep.
3 plus grade levels below. So that tells me that 14% of the students they're reading, and they're reading at 5th grade or below,
Correct.
although they're in 8th grade, right?
Yes.
Quick question, because I know we're going to get into these stretch growth and how we can help to get those students to where they need to be. I would love to, maybe in the future, just to see what proportion of students are above grade level, right? So we are at or above grade level, and I think they're put there together, if I'm not mistaken, right? Mid or above grade level?
Yeah, we'd have to wait for iReady, or
Right.
not iReady, IAR scores to come out. They don't necessarily break them up. Like, that's the score, is that they're at mid or above.
Yeah, I just think that for maybe future consideration, if that data is available to us, I don't know if it would be 10% of that 40% or above.
Yeah, like, yes, it's just not available through iReady. I won't be able to do that till they take
That's
IAR.
end of the year, right?
Yep,
Okay.
and they hit the exceeds, then I can.
Okay, thanks.
Mm-hmm. All right, so this, really, I just want to talk a little bit about stretch growth. So we've spent a lot of time, iReady is somewhat new to us, really focusing in on what is our typical growth. And iReady's done some research and has really been working with us to really rethink our thinking and really start to focus in on our stretch growth, because that really ensures that we're pushing every single kid. And that's how we move our kids that are at grade level to exceeding, right, is by really focusing in on that stretch growth. So this chart really lets us know where our kids currently at with our stretch growth. And it indicates kids that are at least 50% of the way there, which would mean they're on track to hit that growth. Because we know once they hit their stretch growth, they're like 3 times more likely, right, to be able to show that growth in those grade level proficiency, particularly for our students who are performing below grade level. So we're really focusing in on meeting stretch growth versus typical growth.
Just really quickly, Christine, can you define stretch growth? Is that they're at grade level right away, like?
Everybody gets a stretch growth.
Okay.
And so it's what does it need, how much can you it's it's an ambitious yet obtainable goal that's set based upon your fall score. So where you score in the fall, they then set a typical growth target, and that's set by where has most people grown. They take all the kids that started at that score, where they grew, average it together. And for ambitious, they're looking at who had the most growth, and like we're able to make some growth, and that's where those numbers come from.
So just if we kind of take that example from 8th grade, right? The 14% that are reading at 5th grade level, they could have a stretch goal then to be reading by 6th grade level, right? Is that kind of?
Yeah. Yes,
So
that's kind of what that's
average
telling
across
you. Yes.
everybody. It's
Yep.
What level of growth have I gotten?
Correct. And so
Okay.
the research tells us if kids hit their stretch growth twice, 2 years in a row, they're much more likely to hit grade
Okay.
level standards.
Okay.
So is the typical growth the mean growth for people who have scored a certain point?
Yeah.
And is the stretch growth the top quartile? Is it the top 5%? What does that
I
mean,
would
stretch?
I would have to look it up to know exactly what the
Yeah.
statistics was on that, but I don't know that one off. I
That-
know
and
typical
that's
is
okay.
mean.
I think it'd be valuable for us to get that
Yeah.
definition. I think Mr. Lentz is on the right point here, which is, when we say things like stretch, how comfortable are we that there's a portion of our students who should aspire to be in the top quartile of growth versus simply aspire for the median growth of that early score
Yeah.
population?
Yeah, and I think in order to move kids, what they're telling us is we need to work on stretch growth. We need to help every kid hit their stretch growth target.
And it's also equally, and at times even more important for our students in the red and yellow, and whatever that rose color down there, because typical growth for those students is going to continue right where you're at. That's why I love that we're bringing this to the board table, because this matters greatly for all ends of the spectrum. Because again, if you're typical and I'm in that red,
Right, we're
next year,
maintaining-
I'm gonna be back in the red, so we have to be really asking further questions around what is the percent of students in that red zone who are making stretch growth? Because that's when we're gonna start saying, oh, wow, what's happening here? We're gonna close those gaps. That's a gap closer. That's the only way you're ever going to close gaps is through untypical growth. And that's really what that idea around stretch is. So I love that Dr. Igo and the team are bringing this forward to the board, because it gives you more, exactly what both of you said. It just gives you a deeper understanding of what we're trying to push forward.
Well, and that's where too, right? I see it as, for those kids that are in the dark green, right? Of saying, okay, what's the goal, right?
Yep.
You can be here, right? And then we know that we have a number of programs within the district, right, that can help with those things. So that's I'm very interested in what that actual calc is.
Yeah, and I apologize, I did read the
That's
study, I
fine.
just didn't bring it with me.
That's where as well. Like this would be something, because does this get calculated after the first I-Ready, or is it the first
It's
at the end of next?
They take it in the fall.
Okay,
They set a stretch goal for the spring.
got it.
This is telling us how many kids are at least halfway there.
Is that something that, because I don't remember seeing that in the report. Well, so I'm talking about in the parent report. I would love to see something like this on the
I don't
parent
know the
report
answer
as
to that.
well, to be able to say, hey, this is your child's stretch goal for where they should be, right? Because again, this is just another communication metric that we have that can be there to say, hey, look, here's where we want to see your kid at.
We had
I need to
No,
look.
you go.
We had an earlier conversation about the efficacy of the PLCs, and the conversation that teachers shared with us had to do with the specific lessons in programs that they were teaching. When I look at this discussion that we're having here about, particularly for stretch goals for folks in that red and rose-colored buckets, the opportunity to tailor lessons to help those students who would have been characterized in the red buckets achieve those stretch goals strikes me as an opportunity for the PLCs to build on what they're already
100%.
doing for the individual lessons.
Yep, that's exactly what we want them to be doing.
And who is it that sets the stretch goal specifically for students?
iReady
iReady.
does.
So
It's part of the process.
It's just it's essentially a calculation they can.
It's a
make.
calculation, yep.
All right.
Good conversation.
Okay, so grade 3 is one of those that we are definitely watching as they were impacted by the pandemic. I mentioned earlier, we did see a slight increase in their national percentile ranking, indicating that our students are progressing and starting to close some of those gaps. And we do have 50% of our students in that grade level on track to meet their stretch growth. This is a particular cohort where we've seen a pattern where they grow exponentially from winter to spring. So we anticipate that we're gonna have a good number of these kids hit their stretch goal. So we feel pretty good about 3rd grade, given the additional work that we've put in place in regards to responding to reading through writing. I wanna put that out there as well. So just kind of summarizing and putting this all together, we really feel pretty strongly about grade 5 and grade 8 in terms of meeting those benchmarks. And then in grade 3, we have that one as yellow, and that really has to do with, we have, again, made some progress over time with increasing proficiency levels at 3rd grade, but yet we haven't yet hit that benchmark. So we are hopeful that with the additional growth that we're hoping to see and the additional focus on writing, because iReady doesn't take into account the writing portion, and that's where we tend to do well, that we will see this probably not hit the benchmark, but be within 5 points of it.
So just to repeat what you said, because that was kind of new to me. So iReady doesn't, I don't know what the right word is, doesn't take in the writing portion that IRA
Right.
does do. Do we have an assessment, or how are teachers watching
Yeah,
writing?
so that was the work that we did last year, if you remember. We identified that was an area of need for us.
After looking at the IRA.
As looking at IAR that we
I'm
were
saying it
missing.
wrong. Yeah, okay.
Like, when the kids couldn't write, that was where we were struggling. So we then created those lessons that put those things in place, and we provided the teachers opportunities to engage in learning, bring their student data back, and move their data kind of along the way. So we've got it, and even in our current new resource, we went through and revised some of the writing prompts within the resource to make sure that they matched IAR, and our students got that opportunity to practice. So these are the action steps that we had, really focusing in on professional learning and supporting our staff in implementing that new resource. All teachers have been receiving their professional learning prior to the launch of each new unit, as well as we've been building layers of leadership through our reading specialists and ISCs, our EL teachers, and our special ed coaches. So they're coming together monthly to get the same training and understanding, and then pushing into and supporting the on-the-ground implementation over time. So just take a look at some of those math iReady scores. This is similar to what you saw in reading. Again, our proficiency levels look similar over the last 3 years. We have highlighted grades 3 and 5 because those are the ones that we're monitoring. And when we look at our 3rd grade cohorts, we do see kind of a drop in our national percentile rankings. We're going to talk a little bit about that when we get to that slide. And in grade 5, we definitely saw an increase in their national percentile ranking kind of over time. When we look at our middle school, again, our proficiency levels are similar to those we've seen in the last 3 years. Additionally, we see an increase in our national percentile ranking from winter to winter, again, for our kids in 8th grade, showing that they're obtaining those skills. We take a look here. Again, here's our stretch growth. We know that as kids get older, that stretch growth becomes a little bit harder to reach. When we really look at our growth over time, we really were concerned about grade 7. That's been our highest performing group over time, and we aren't seeing the growth that we had anticipated. And in response to that, and we also aren't seeing the same growth we saw last year in 6th grade. So we've been working with our middle school teams to take a look at that data and put an improvement plan in place to make sure that we are addressing the lack of growth that we've been typically seeing.
So I just want to highlight that the IAR, we've talked about this before, that data is the autopsy. It's after kids are all done with that, and we're unpacking what happened. What's remarkable to me is these are things we can change on time,
Yep.
during it,
100%.
and if they if teachers have the data to do it, they'll understand how to make they'll work through those changes. This is, to me, really pretty cool, because I don't have to wait to see what the state says. I can see right here, I can make changes. You've got the structure with all the other stuff, but I
Yeah.
just want to point out, this is real-time kinds of stuff.
Well, and it allows us to be responsive and be systemic with it, right? We've identified very clear places. I said first grade phonics, third grade writing, sixth, seventh grade math, right? Like that we've put some district-wide things in place. We've also identified where schools might be struggling, where we saw some consistency over time, and where we then went in and are helping to support schools. Because at the end of the day, we need to respond to the data we have in front of us.
So can I ask briefly that, in the process of looking at this data, the teachers see it pretty quickly.
Oh yeah, they see it immediately.
Who else has eyes on it to say to that grade level, you better take a look, you better?
Yeah, we all, actually, we all do, right? Like, I'm gonna lean back into PLC, right? Like, the culture is we are all responsible for all kids. So teachers at grade levels have it, principals have it. We at L&T pull it apart, you know, from top to bottom to say, what are we seeing, where are we seeing it? And then we all have those conversations. Whether it's something we need to do as a, like, district-wide, like we got very systemic with it for phonics. And then, you know, and there are some buildings where Jared and I have gone in and sat down and just had conversations to say, look what we're seeing, what is it you need to do, and help people get very focused and intentional, right? It's easy to see this data and go, like, I'm gonna change everything. And we're like, stop, stop, stop. We're gonna pick one thing that has leverage that we're gonna get really good at, that we know is going to make a change. And so just helping people find that one piece that's going to leverage the change over time.
So Dr. Igo, I think you had mentioned we've seen relatively consistent performance over the last few years, right? So with this emphasis on the PLC work and the stretch growth, how quickly do we anticipate we will see higher performance as they're incoming? So for the fall, how quickly will we start to see this manifest itself in the data of the students at or above grade level, right? Because we obviously see, you know, smaller numbers as they come in the fall, which then grows through the winter months as they're learning more and more.
I think it's really important to remember that the fall numbers should be small because they haven't been taught it yet, right? Like, we test our students because we need to get in the 11 weeks of like, there's a time frame you have to have. We haven't given them any instruction on grade level standards, so that number should be small in the fall, but we should see it grow over time.
Well, and that was kind of the rationale behind the question earlier of how many students are above grade level, because then presumably they should be coming in with some level of proficiency for the following grade level, right? So as we focus on that more and more, we should have students who
Absolutely.
are somewhat proficient or very proficient as they enter in the fall,
Yeah,
if this
100%.
works, right?
It will
Or
work.
when it works.
This just provides you kind of an overview of our students in Algebra 1 prior to high school, and then in Algebra 2 prior to their senior year.
Can you, what does that enrolled percentage equate to? Is that every student that's taken Algebra 2 before senior year?
Yes, it is. So if you've already, like, there's a lot of kids who took Algebra 2 in their freshman or their sophomore year. As long as they earned a C, they're counted in the enrolled.
Okay. So then this would indicate then that we have 7% of our high school students that are not taking it until senior year.
Yeah.
Okay.
That aren't passing. Well, the not passing is the 86%, right? Yeah. So this is our third grade here. Our math, they are definitely, we're seeing some slower than expected growth here. This cohort, again, has typically grown more from winter to spring. But we also know, based upon our data, that when we work on the writing part in reading, we also saw growth in math. So we're hoping to see those things kind of work on both sides of that, with really kind of that focus on all kids reading by the end of third grade. And we know fourth and fifth grade gives us that opportunity to really put that time and energy in math.
So just to go back to that, because you said it before and I wasn't sure, you're saying that cohort, that particular cohort grows more, not that they're in third grade and third graders
No,
grow more?
that cohort, when I look back at kindergarten, first grade, second grade, we see some pretty significant growth from
That's interesting.
winter to spring. So this provides kind of that overview of where we think we'll be in terms of whether we'll meet those targets or not. While we are seeing proficiency and growth that's similar to where we were last year in grade 3, we didn't meet the mark last year, right? And so even if we are to continue to grow, we will likely see more proficiency, but we likely won't hit the target within 5 percentage points. Grade 5, we are feeling like that's a possibility. We feel strongly that we are going to hit it at grade 8. We have that algebra 1 before high school, kind of in the yellow, because we aren't going to hit that goal. And then our algebra 2 is looking good. Our action steps that we had in our student achievement report, we really were focusing in, while at ELA, our focus was really on professional learning and support. In math, it's really been on scope and sequence and making sure that we have all the right scope and sequence in place. We've really been focusing in particularly on geometry, probability, stats, and fluency. And at grade 4 in particular, we've really moved some things around in our scope and sequence so that our geometry unit is really hitting kids before they take that IAR. And then we really looked at our students in our accelerated courses and have really moved to kind of like a telescoped curriculum, making sure that we're teaching everything and not skipping things, which will then likely improve those scores for our 7th and 8th graders. Those things are in place. And we've been working through our fluency strand and providing more opportunities for practice in that arena in our K-5. Again, high school, we don't have any data to make predictions, but we really wanted to provide you with an update on where we are as it relates to the action steps that we put in place. So as we talked about in November, all students are taking the digital SAT, and while the skills have remained the same, the format has definitely changed. So we have, all of our high school teachers have taken that new digital SAT to better understand what those expectations are, to understand the rigor and the complexity of the text that students are going to need to read, and then engaged in a conversation with department chairs, led by their department chairs, about what are the things that they need to change or do within their courses to ensure that our kids are reaching and are ready to hit the rigor that's
Can you speak
expected.
briefly to how that examination has changed? I know we chatted a little bit about it in our planning meeting.
Yeah, so it's a digital, and it's got like what we call a 2-part adaptable. So they're going to take one part of the test, depending on how they score on that first part of the test. They're then will be given another set of questions. So they're kind of standard, but the adaptability is in between the 2 sections of the test, right? But they made some changes, pretty significant changes to like the ELA portion, not the content or the skills kids need to know, but as opposed to reading a large passage and maybe answering multiple questions about a 5-paragraph essay, I'm going to say it like that, to their reading very short pieces of text that are maybe 150 to maybe 300 words total. And the text doesn't really build on each other. So that's a pretty significant change in what you need to do and the skills you're going to have to bring to the table in order to really unpack that. And really putting in pretty heavy science and social studies in terms of content knowledge and text that is definitely related to science and social studies has always been there, But there's a lot, it's a little bit more focused, and there's a little bit more in terms of knowing how to read graphs and things like that. In the math portion, same kind of idea. There used to be a no calculator portion, now that's gone. Everything is done through that calculator, and it's much more kind of conceptual than we had seen in the past.
And then if I'm not mistaken, the sequence of the questions changes based off of the prior answer, right, as far as?
It's two parts. So it's not adaptable like the iReady test is adaptable, right? That changes based upon every question I answer going harder or easier. It's adaptable by section. So there's two parts to the ELA section, two parts to the math. The first part is kind of standard, and how kids respond, and that determines what they get in the second part. But not every question is changing. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I got it. I think I was confusing those two.
For sure.
Thank you.
I'm like, I forgot where I was. Digital SAT. As we discussed, when we talked about the student achievement report, the data really was telling us that our kids were not engaging with enough complex, rigorous grade level text and above grade level text. I think one of the things that really hit as we all took the digital SAT is that they need to be able to read not only high school content, but early college content in order to hit the benchmark of the 540. So that was really, I think, gave us a lot of opportunity to really unpack that. And so we've put some support in place. We've got our grade 11, all grade 11 students, are field testing a common resource, and implementing a common unit of study called the American Dream. And in that, we've really worked in both literary and informational text, which is a big piece of what we need to do. Additionally, we've given access to all grade levels to have access to that resource, and that PLCs are utilizing that resource to ensure that they're hitting the complex rigor of the text that they need to make sure kids are getting the exposure that they need and opportunities to work through that. Additionally, we also found there's a benchmark assessment system in there, and all of our students in grades 9 through 11 have taken that benchmark assessment, and teachers have had that in their hands to really unpack what to do with that information and being able to respond in real time. We're hopeful that this will be something we can bring forward as we can use, but we're just learning the data, and it's not directly aligned, so we need to spend some time making sure that there's some alignment before we bring that forward. The other piece that we've done, and we've done this in math as well, is we've really tied our quick checks, Thomas, you had asked earlier about that, to the SAT. And so what our conversations have been is that all of our standards are tied to the SAT. And so where we want to spend our time is in that SAT bank of questions, and making sure that kids are getting opportunities to engage with those SAT bank of questions aligned to what is happening in their classroom. And that's what we're trying to connect, is the rigor of the assessment, the rigor of the instruction, and that what you're doing in your classroom like reflects that type. You're teaching exactly the skills that kids are going to need to be successful.
Christine, to take it back to ELA, I don't mean to jump us back, but can you just give a little bit on a quick touch points for ELA, where we're at with that process of giving them resources, or what you guys need as far as that?
Yeah, so that was, we have a field test going. That's what we talked about, that field test. They're all grade 11 is using the same common unit that we're working through. Like, we've got very clear, this is what we're doing, this is how we're utilizing it, and we've got clear those quick checks, either coming from the SAT or directly from that unit, and then we're rolling that down in 9 and 10.
Dr. Argo, how does that commonality intersect with the AP curriculum, both in ELA and in math? So you're talking about a common unit of study for ELA around American Dream. How does that match what's happening in the AP courses?
In the AP courses, yeah, so they have a separate kind of curriculum that they need to follow in order to meet, but they have access to and have been utilizing some of the resources within here to help support them. So it's the standard and the honors English 11 that's really working through the same unit, because those, once they get into those AP, they have to follow that course scope and sequence.
I do have one follow-up to that.
Yeah.
Related to PLCs, if you're an AP teacher, where do you fall in PLCs?
Yeah, it would depend. There might be an AP PLC or it might be that you're also teaching English Honors 11, and you might be a part of the English Honors 11 PLC this year.
Okay.
Probably an AP teacher is not going to only be teaching 5 AP classes all day,
Probably not.
so.
Yeah.
But I will say we've used a lot of that AP stuff to help us to increase the rigor of some of our rubrics and making sure that they've helped us to make sure that the rigor and the text that kids are reading are of the right rigor. Let me say it that way.
So just to follow up, without having a lot of knowledge in this, are the AP, the teachers who are teaching AP, they're getting their own data to be sure their kids
Yeah,
and
they're
their
writing their own
instructional
quick text,
practice?
yep.
Okay.
That aligns to the AP exam, right?
And with regard to AP as well, are we providing them opportunities to go to things like AP seminars and things like that?
Oh, of course, of course. Yep, we have, we make sure that we always encourage them to participate, but we require that they do it every 5 years.
Okay.
And they're inputting their data into the tool.
Yes, as long as
And-
they're part of a PLC, yes.
Well, I mean, specific to the AP class data. I'm trying to understand because I appreciate your point. An AP teacher's not gonna have 5 periods of AP,
Right.
more than likely.
Your follow-up is kind of where I was gonna go next, I think.
Who is reflecting and evaluating on the AP performance is really in a nutshell.
Yeah,
Because they're probably not gonna be in an AP PLC.
they might not be. That's a great question. We really have said that you need to be a part of a PLC this year because the goal is to learn and understand and get the process down. Trying to do it across multiple PLCs would be very difficult, so that will eventually be where we're headed. So there's a chance that they might not be engaged in this process this year.
Their AP portion of their instruction is not.
That is possible,
One
yes.
hopes that what they're learning will help.
Oh, absolutely, transition over.
But we don't have any, we wouldn't be gathering all of that.
No, we would not.
Oh, that was the reason I was asking if we are allowing or providing for them to go to seminars and things like that, because AP is a very different course than anything else. It has to be taught dramatically differently, and it's assessed dramatically differently. And so because of that, I think it's important that we're affording them every opportunity for success in that area.
As we discussed with ELA, all math teachers have taken the digital SAT and engaged in that same conversation. Additionally, all our courses, they're using the quick checks with the SAT bank of questions to ensure rigor and alignment across all of those things. Additionally, we've been actively reviewing all of our pathways across all levels, K-12. And when we come back with our high school experience recommendations, we'll be bringing back some changes to our pathways, some recommendations as it relates to changes in our pathways, starting all the way down in 2nd grade.
Dr. Igo, is there any brief update regarding the Chapin Hall analysis and the K-12 data and any trends? I know it's kind of in the early progress state, but have we
Yeah.
received any feedback from them or?
No, I know that I know that he has all the data, he's reviewing the data. He has a date for us in the end of April to come back together, and he'll actually meet with our teachers and walk them through the data.
Thank you.
College and career readiness. Again, we want to make sure that we're following all of those pieces. We talked a little bit about successful transitions between levels, elementary, middle, from elementary to middle and middle to high school. Our data indicates that students are transitioning well at that middle school. We have 77% of them hitting that B GPA or higher, which again is that connector. At the high school level, we have on track for graduation is at 98%, which is the highest we've seen. So that means we've got students that are well on track for graduation in 4 years. So we do see that the GPA, the B GPA, is not as high as we would like. Again, we're following those GPAs over time. we're paying attention at not only at ninth grade, at 10th, 11th, and 12th, and you can kind of see where that they fall. We do see kind of a dip as in that 10th grade year, but that kind of rebounds in the 11th grade year. So when we come back and talk about the high school experience, we have some thoughts around that as well. This just kind of outlines our enrollments across advanced courses. At the high school, we're really focused on early college credit, middle school AT, and accelerated courses. We're seeing an upward tick. Really excited about, we're in the process of identifying for AT ELA. Really excited that we've seen the work that we have done as it relates to writing, which is what was holding people back, holding kids back. We've seen a significant rise in the number of kids that will likely be eligible. So we're excited about that. Again, this just kind of provides an overview of where they fall across each of those, so that you have that big picture look. And again, these are the steps that we were kind of taken. You can see that many of them are in progress. We've taken a look at and revised some of that AT identification process to make sure we're hitting all kids. Then just again, I mentioned this earlier, the data is only good if we do something with it, right? And it's really important. And this just provides you kind of a big picture look, probably a little bit easier to, now that you've had some information, bring some clarity. But really focusing here on those next steps that we really need to implement and monitor the district-wide and those building level responsive plans. We've been really cautious, intentional about making sure we know what needs to happen. And then again, being really purposeful and intentional and focused so that we can pay attention and monitor. And we have those across multiple places. Then we want to continue to implement those recommendations in the Student Achievement Report, and then really continue to build teacher capacity to analyze and respond to evidence of their learning, because ultimately that's where we get bang for our buck, if you will.
If I can back us up for just a second here, we kind of glossed through the establish an AP committee. Who is on that AP committee? How is that being?
Yeah, we are in the process of working through that because of the high school experience, which was a goal we came out with later. We wanted to get that on track first, and they're going to get ready, but that committee will include or includes some building level administrators, AP teachers, counselors. But our end goal is to make sure it's really clear about what it is we're doing and how we're doing it. But we wanted to make sure everything fit into the pathways first.
So one of the things that I think we might want to talk about or consider is the school by school progress, and to have an opportunity to see what kinds of action plans people are doing, how they respond to their data. So, Dr. Gordon.
Yeah, that will be something that we're going to bring forward to the board next year. That will be a fall piece where it gives us time over the summer to work with our teams. That will be a different process, and I've done this, in a number of districts for a number of times. One of the things that it can turn into is a little bit of a dog and pony show, and it doesn't give the board or the community a really good sense. So I really want to make sure that we work through it so it's meaningful for the people who are coming to the board, and for the board to really get a deep understanding of what it looks like at each of the schools, and really having the principals own that aspect with their team, whomever they want to bring forward. So they're really talking about their work and their school that's unique, as opposed to everyone's doing the same thing, because we could have everybody rolling up here and saying PLC to you a number of times, and I don't think that's going to be beneficial. But it really will, we think, be very beneficial for us to have that school by school look, by principals having those conversations with the board about where are they going and what's that critical work that they're engaged in right now, which will look a little bit different at each of the levels. So that's our next year piece that will be a little bit new. I don't, my year and a half. I'm not sure if the board's engaged in that in the past, and really thinking about each school and their steps going forward.
So I was going to ask something similar. I know I've asked this before about celebrating, right? And about each of the individual schools, and I know we don't have the breakdown, I know you guys have the breakdown for the school.
You do have it in
Is it in the other one? Okay, I haven't gotten there yet, but, that's one thing that, again, I would like to see something for, like, you know, whomever is performing. I really like today to see the folks from CORE on there. That hit me a little close to home there. But again, seeing, you know, having to celebrate some of those things where we've made some really good progress, because I think there's a lot to be very happy about in this, right? And so, you know, I just, again, ask you to come back with, here, where can we do that to celebrate those folks at the table?
And quite honestly, that's a growth area of your superintendent. I'm a process person, and sometimes I need to be stopped and saying, oh, we got to stop for a moment and really celebrate, because you're absolutely right, Mr. Lenz. There's a lot of amazing things that are occurring in our organization right now that I am incredibly proud of, and that we should be putting on full display for our community. So thank you for continuing to push me and get me out of my process world and a stop and a reflective mode to recognize, because you're right. I had an opportunity to meet with the PLC leader of that group and the principal, and I could not have been more proud a few weeks ago. Just really them talking about what you saw there. I loved what somebody had mentioned, the process. I can't tell anybody what to believe, but we can start changing practices. And over time, and that was a great example of practices over time changing her beliefs. Her statement, I wasn't on board, but that takes time, because that's that change management, that's that human aspect in which we work with, that people have to eventually buy into this work. And again, why we have to keep supporting, because everybody's on a little bit different journey to it, but we have so much to celebrate in our organization, so thank you for that.
I had the opportunity to see the principals at work this last week. They had a full day with Janelle, and then and I spent a couple hours in the afternoon. And having walked their walk, I never had that kind of professional learning. You learned it on your own if you were interested in how to do data and how to assess. And so we're providing it at multiple levels so that people can actually lead at the building level. And I think we've been so involved in buildings as a fleet.
That will never go.
I think it would be really nice to be able to be involved. You have a board that's very interested in academic achievement and student success, and I think that would be really helpful for us to see the workings that are going on inside, and the celebrations, the frustrations, the challenges, and this is what we need, because that's our role as well. So however we can partner with you to present, because I'll be really frank about it, if we bring a principal and their team here after they've worked to present, and then we ask them questions that throw them off, that isn't good for any of us. So I would really like to be able to have presentations that lead to good discussion rather than challenging.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
It does, and that's why we want to take time with it. And I appreciate the partnership with the board. What does that look like from the board side too? So you're getting what you need out of those school conversations. But the piece that you mentioned, you know, when we brought our educators together last week, it was just another really good example of our organization moving away from site-based to systems, to a whole system. I mean, that's what you talked about in years past. In many organizations, not talking about D303, it really was up to a leader to say, okay, what do I really want to focus on? What do I want to do? Here we're saying we're following our strategic plan. This is the work we're doing. And we're going to provide you high-quality professional learning, some of the best in the country right here with you, and then followed up by our learning teaching team walking side by side with our leaders throughout our organization. Mr. Kuchar, you asked a great question, where are we going to start seeing results? We are going to start seeing results. We are going to start seeing those results over time, because when you have educators like we saw at Coron across the board who continue to monitor student learning, make changes to their instruction. Dr. Igo was really clear on this. What does the data say about me? Not about our kids, about my instruction. That's what students are, we're responding to my instruction that just occurred here. And me making changes to my instruction is one of the most powerful things we can do as an organization that will move student learning in the coming months and in coming years. I am so excited about where we're going.
Well, I appreciate all of the positive conversation, especially about the PLCs in elementary and even in middle school, where there's high levels of commonality around the program of study. Even as we talk about AT and other programs within, there's high commonality. When we get to high school, there's much more divergence in course of study, and you talk about pathways. The pathways for the kids who will apply to Caltech look different than the kids who apply to ECC. Not too many schools have AP chemistry by year 2 as one of their qualifications, like Caltech might. I think when we start to talk about the efficacy of PLCs and the relationship between PLCs and department heads and all of the improvement investment that we make at the high school level programmatically, we've talked about things like AP Pre-Calc just over the last couple of months and changing the catalog and looking at that high school experience. I think it's incumbent on us to talk about the role PLCs play in these specialized courses, and for the reality that there are multiple pathways and that we have high expectations for many students to participate not only in early college credit, but early college credit of different sorts. So when we look at that number and we say, these are early college courses that might be ECC courses, these are AP courses, our collective efficacy in delivering those and the tools used to create that collective efficacy differ. If you have one teacher who teaches the U of I's Calc 3 course, that teacher's ability to collaborate in a PLC around the content is quite different. And so I think I bring that up just to say that it's quite clear that the progress on PLCs in elementary and middle school is very positive, and that we have some conversation to be had around the role and the way that PLCs work for the high schools. And so as we think about investment in program and redefinition of the student experience and what we offer, I think how we offer it and where PLCs play certainly comes to my mind as something for us to focus on here at this table and probably in this committee over the next year.
Yeah, I would concur with that. I think all those points that you brought up, I think that an opportunity to bring in high school leaders who are doing some of these singletons, and what does that look like? So you hear those experiences as well, because those are really important pieces. What does that look like when you have the one? Where are we getting those resources, that additional support that Mr. McNally was speaking about? What does that look like? Because it is vastly different than anybody else. But I'm equally as excited about the work that's occurring at the high school. And we can't forget the amazing work that's going on there as well. We'll continue to bring back, I think one of the things that we definitely want to do is continue to bring back either in person or through video, so you can kind of have that glimpse of what's occurring across our system and not just focus on either K or elementary or middle or high school, but give you a really nice flavor of what's going across our system. So the board really has a deep understanding of where it's at, because it's not all sunshine and rainbows. It's not. We have some struggles that we're facing on a daily basis, and you need to hear those too. You need to hear what are the barriers that are in the way, and some of you asked those questions. Great questions tonight.
Well, and I also think it's really important to notice that our students are coming prepared and doing well when they go into the high school. And that wasn't always the case. And so what happens at high school after a long time of being ready is really critical, because that's our last opportunity to give them the highest success they can get. So
Okay, well, I think that brings us to item 3A, future agenda items.
Yeah, so our next agenda, we'll be bringing some curriculum resources, as we typically do, as just our renewals. And we're gonna do an update on our summer school, and there's one more thing. STEM, Empower, thank you. At kindergarten, the K-5. So we've made some changes, right, as we move from Empower into Applied Science, or STEM, as the teachers have decided. So we're gonna be bringing that forward as well.
This just came to mind, so I'm sorry if it's out of the blue. Do we need an update on the transitions and the communication, and what's happening for all the redistricting that will happen next year? And is this the right place to do it?
I think learning cheat sheet would make a lot of sense, that we can bring our overall plan of what does that look like at our elementaries, as again, some are more impacted than others, but absolutely.
I would even go, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Please.
I was gonna say, I would go a step further, like we've talked about. I think this really needs to be an item at our future meetings, whether it's a board meeting or a learning and teaching committee, if it's appropriate, resources or whatever, business services, but it really needs to be talked about multiple times.
Yeah, I was gonna focus specifically on my previous ask, which was the Richmond plan. I think we had previously said it would come to learning and teaching first, and then obviously whatever you need at business service. I know we had at least one item that came to business services, like FTE wise, but, so.
Well, I think that's that. So that will bring us to item 3B, adjournment at 7:33 PM. Thanks, everyone.
I would like to call to order the special meeting of the Community Union School District 303 School Board on Tuesday, February 20th, 2024, at 7:43 PM. Ms. Marsan, would you please take the roll?
Yes, Mrs. Bell,
Here.
Mr. Kuschert,
Here.
Mr. Lackner,
Here.
Mr. Lentz,
Here.
Mrs. McCabe,
Here.
Mr. McNally,
Here.
Mrs. Fairgrave.
Here. Please stand for the pledge to the flag. There are no citizen comments at this time, so we will move to item 3 on the agenda. Can I have a motion to adjourn to closed session for the purpose of the appointment, employment, compensation, discipline, performance, or dismissal of specific employees, specific individuals who serve as independent contractors in a park, recreational, or educational setting, or specific volunteers of the public body, or legal counsel for the public body, including hearing testimony on a complaint lodged against an employee, a specific individual who serves as an independent contractor in a park, recreational, or educational setting, or a volunteer of the public body, or against legal counsel for the public body to determine its validity.
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Lentz. Is there a
Second.
second? Thank you, Mr. Kuschert. Ms. Marsan, would you please take the roll call vote?
Mr. Kuschert,
Yes.
Mr. Lackner,
Yes.
Mr. Lentz,
Yes.
Mrs. McCabe,
Yes.
Mr. McNally,
Yes.
Mrs. Bell,
Yes.
Mrs. Fairgrave.
Yes, motion passes 7-0.